If you've ever wondered why translating between English and Chinese is so much more complicated than just swapping out vocabulary, well, you are in exactly the right place. In this explainer, we're decoding the profound structural, cognitive, and philosophical mechanics that separate these two global giants.
To set the stage for our journey, look at this fascinating insight from the renowned translation theorist Eugene Nida. He hit the nail on the head when he said, the most important difference is the contrast between form and consensual. Basically, English operates on strict grammatical forms, while Chinese, it relies heavily on consensus and context. This one idea is going to unlock everything we explore today.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We'll be covering written words and tones, sentence length and structure, active versus passive voice, idioms and abstract nouns, emphasis and cultural philosophy, and finally, the impact on pragmatic communication.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Written Words and Tones.
At the most fundamental, foundational level, Chinese uses visual building blocks for meaning, whereas English relies on a purely phonetic alphabet. Think about it. In English, you sound a word out using letters. But in Chinese, you look at visual components, known as radicals. If you combine the radical for I with the radical for water, logically, you get tears. It is this intensely visual, almost architectural way of building meaning.
And this phonetic foundation, it's exactly why spoken Chinese can be a bit of a minefield for native English speakers. We use our intonation to show emotion or to ask a question, right? But in Chinese, intonation, the specific tone, dictates the strict dictionary meaning of the word itself. So if you mix up your tones, you could accidentally ask a stranger for a kiss instead of just asking a simple question. Or, you might announce you're going to sleep when what you really want is a plate of dumplings. The stakes are real.
Moving on to Section 2, Sentence Length and Structure.
So here is the absolutely crucial structural difference. English is what linguists call hypotactic, meaning it needs explicit grammatical connectors. Chinese, on the other hand, is paratactic. It relies on implied, consensual context. English constantly uses words like and, because, if, and when to glue its clauses together. Chinese often just skips the glue. It trusts you, the listener, to understand the logical relationship based purely on the sequence of events. To really visualize this, think of English as a branching tree. It's got a main trunk with complex modifier clauses and pronouns just dangling all over it. Chinese is totally different. It's a lot more like a bamboo stalk. It grows sequentially, joint by joint. Instead of untangling these long, hierarchical sentences, you just follow the events chronologically, step by step. In short, sequential bytes separated by commas.
Which brings us to Section 3, active versus passive voice.
Now, you know how English loves to hide the subject behind a passive voice to sound formal or objective? We'll say something like, bananas are widely believed to grow on trees. But Chinese pushes back against that impersonal style. It heavily favors a living, breathing subject driving the action forward. So a literal translation of that same idea in Chinese active voice would be more like, generally believe bananas are fruit nodding on trees.
So, what does this actually mean in practice? Well, it forces translators to constantly shift gears. Turning those very active, living Chinese structures into the passive, objective tone that English speakers expect in formal settings is a massive mental pivot. If you did a direct word-for-word translation, a highly formal Chinese business document would sound bizarrely informal and personal in English.
Let's dive into Section 4, Idioms and Abstract Nouns.
When it comes to handling abstract concepts, Chinese uses these incredibly vivid images from the natural world, whereas English often leans on somewhat sterile clinical terms. For instance, instead of saying a word like disintegration, Chinese uses an idiom that literally translates to landslides and tiles disintegrate. Or for total exhaustion, it's the muscles are weary and strength used up. Perfect harmony becomes mix well like milk and water. It paints a highly visual, physical picture in your mind to express something completely intangible.
And this isn't just some quirky vocabulary thing. It actually reveals a deeply ingrained philosophical worldview. Traditional Chinese philosophy doesn't separate human beings from nature. Instead, it frames human life as a microcosm within the natural macrocosm. So, the language naturally borrows the physical weight of earth, water, and mountains to explain our human condition.
That leads us perfectly into Section 5, Emphasis and Cultural Philosophy.
This underlying philosophy actually dictates how logic itself flows. In English, we use what's called straight thinking. We demand the result up front.
We drop the bottom line immediately, and then we explain the supporting facts to show how we got there. Chinese logic uses what's known as a tortuous or spiral approach. It patiently builds the context, the environment, and the background facts first, saving the ultimate conclusion or result for the very end.
Furthermore, there is this Chinese dialectical approach that comfortably blends opposites as a harmonious whole. In strict Western logic, things are usually binary, black or white. But take the Chinese concept of shode. To an English speaker, giving and taking are mutually exclusive actions. But in Chinese, they fuse into a single concept, meaning to take by giving. You have to give in order to receive.
Now, it's absolutely crucial to remember that these are entirely objective differences in cognitive framing. They are not value judgments. English structure reflects an analytical, individualistic approach, breaking things down into parts. Chinese structure reflects a holistic pragmatism, looking at how the parts relate to the whole. And honestly, misunderstanding this fundamental difference is exactly where global communication and negotiations often fall apart.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, Impact on Pragmatic Communication.
So, what actually happens when these vast structural differences collide in real time? Well, simultaneous interpreters face an immense cognitive load due to something called tonal lag. It is literally a terrifying neurological race. In just 1.5 seconds, the interpreter has to hear a Chinese syllable, process its acoustic pitch, decode the context to resolve any tonal ambiguity, and only then can they formulate the English equivalent.
And remember that tortuous, context-building sentence structure we talked about? Because Chinese often hides the main verb at the very end of a long chain of modifiers, interpreters have to utilize incredible short-term memory. They literally have to suspend all that incoming information about the unknown subject in a mental buffer, waiting patiently for the sentence final verb resolution so they can finally construct their standard English subject-verb-object sentence. But beyond just grammar and memory, interpreters act as essential cultural mediators. Direct, literal translations can be completely disastrous. For example, an English speaker's blunt rejection often has to be carefully softened into a discussion of neutral factors to protect the social face of the Chinese counterpart. The ultimate goal is preserving the harmony that is absolutely central to Chinese communication.
As our world becomes increasingly interconnected across borders and boardrooms, true understanding obviously requires a lot more than just a dictionary. So, the crucial question I want to leave you with today is this: how might bridging these two vastly different linguistic philosophies fundamentally shape the future of global communication? Think about it.